How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylei Hobby Time. We're back in the Wild West this week, and today I'm going to be making another monster encounter. This one is set in southeastern Colorado and is a fight between a group of Comanche warriors and a giant centipede. After I had chosen the figures that I wanted and I cut them from their sprues, I prepared their teepees by trimming off the bases that came on the bottom of the teepee. I decided to use 3 teepees for this diorama. I wanted to include some warriors on horseback, and in order to get each of the riders to stay on their horse, I drilled a little hole in both the back of the horse and in the rider, and I anchored them together with a little metal rod. I prepared 3 horses this way, as well as 5 foot soldiers to engage in this little battle. In my opinion, one of the most depraved animals in all of creation is the giant centipede. Luckily, they aren't where I live in Colorado, but they do have a presence in the southeastern part of the state, and that is where this diorama is set. I used a gesso board as the base for this diorama, and I cut up some XPS foam to the size of the board, and I glued it to the board. I stacked another layer of foam on top of that before carving the detail into the terrain. The geography of southeastern Colorado is primarily semi-arid plains and grasslands with scattered mesas and washes throughout. The goal was to make this diorama look like it would fit in that setting. After adding some rock texture to the steep sections, I used a blowtorch to add a more natural look to the perfectly flat plateau, and then it was time to throw on some terrain paste. I mixed up some plaster, paint, and Mod Podge, which I thinned down with a little bit of water to get it to the right consistency, which in this case was like peanut butter. For a funny prank that you can play on your friends, you can smear this on some bread with jelly and then eat it in front of your friends. I'm just kidding about that, by the way. Don't eat plaster paint or Mod Podge. Although they are non-toxic, they will definitely mess up your gut. After I had let the terrain paste dry for 24 hours, I came back to it to add some texture. In the end, I covered most of the texture with grass, but I didn't know how much grass I was going to add at this point, so I just threw on plenty of texture just to be safe. I glued it down with isopropyl alcohol and watered down white glue. I set the base aside to dry again, and then it was time to prime the figures. I primed them all black, and then I began painting the centipede. I haven't seen any giant centipedes in Colorado, but I have seen many of them during my time spent in Southeast Asia. These long spiders have a strange determination to cause harm to other things that I've just not seen in many other bugs. Luckily for the people living in the plains of the wild imaginary West, the armor of the giant centipede doesn't have an equivalent hardness to its smaller counterpart. It also moves slower, which means that these warriors have a legitimate fighting chance of taking down this monster with some well-placed blows. After painting the centipede, I moved back to the base which had that is next week's project. After painting the centipede, I moved back to the base which had fully dried, and I took it outside and I primed it before painting. I've gotten some comments asking why I choose to prime the base instead of just using the colors that are already there. Sometimes I do choose to go straight into the painting, but I've found that the final look is much harder to control when you don't start with a uniform color. In my opinion, it also doesn't look as natural with all the unrelated colors of rock and sand texture. The other aspect of priming is that it puts down a layer that isn't affected by water or alcohol, meaning that if you add washes, it won't cause the glue to loosen and all the texture underneath to peel while you're painting. After a layer of green paint in all the areas that were going to be grassy, I threw on some static tack, and I spread it out and defused the edges with a sponge. After that, I flipped over my Static King static grass applicator full of static grass. I turned on the static and the static grass fell down and stuck to the static tack. And then because of the static, it stood on end. And now the word static has no meaning to me. To clean up the excess grass and ensure it didn't go to waste, I threw an old sock over a vacuum. Once it had been collected, I turned off the vacuum and dropped all the grass back into the hopper. Next, I sprayed on some watered down white glue and I dusted the surface with a variety of colored fibers to give the grass a little bit more of a natural look. I also sprinkled on some yellow flocking to imply dandelions or wildflowers. Next, it was time to add the teepees. Before adding them to the base, I painted them. Some teepees have ornate designs and artwork on their exterior, others don't. I chose to leave these plain, and now that I'm looking back at it, I wish I had added some art and weathered them better. I also don't know if the placement of the camp is very realistic, now that I'm looking at it, but I consider these dioramas as concept art for the story that I'm building, so not all the details will be completely spot on, but it's the idea that's important. After painting up the teepees, it was time to paint the warriors. As you will see from the layout of the diorama, this centipede has approached the camp to attack it. Unfortunately for the centipede, these warriors are all very efficient monster hunters, and they're used to fighting large creatures of all kinds, including giant centipedes. I painted the rest of the minis off camera, and after they were done, it was time to throw them on the base. I dry fit everything to make sure that I was happy with their placement, and then I clipped them off their bases and I glued them in place. For the opposite side of the diorama, I wanted to have some pine trees suggesting the edge of a wooded area. Wooded areas are not that common in southwest Colorado, but they can be found, especially around the mesas. I added some flocking that was the color of dead pine needles around the base of the trees where it would have naturally built up. I also added some green needles to the trees and glued the trees in place with some foam-safe super glue. I sprinkled on a final layer of texture around the base of the trees, and I sealed the whole base with watered down glue and isopropyl alcohol. The last thing to do was to paint the sides of the diorama with a matte black, and after that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.